Social realism is a type of art form used in propaganda and advertising. It is so mundane and common that many might not even consider it an art form. Unless you live in the middle of nowhere, chances are you see it every single day, multiple times a day, no matter how disinterested you are in art and how actively you try to avoid it. Social realism differs from realism in that it is not trying to merely capture reality as it is, but rather how it should be. That said, social realism is never idealistic, epic, or mythological in nature. It never presents itself as capturing the transcendent, or striving towards a noble ideal, like, say, a Renaissance painting. One could say that social realism is in the uncanny valley, as it is not true to life, but neither is it evidently fictional. Probably the most iconic work of social realism is the famous "We Can Do It" poster, which is such a staple of modern culture. I have seen it in multiple classrooms growing up. This feminist icon isn't exactly an accurate portrayal of a woman, but neither is it mythologically exaggerated. She's not an average feminine woman, nor is she a deified, angelic manifestation of the fairer sex. She is a rather mundane artwork of a rather atypical masculine woman. Now, different forms of art serve different functions. Realism can invoke awe in us because of how perfectly photorealistic it can be. It is life how it is, and allows us to see the beauty in how things are. Likewise, more romantic art can evoke higher ideals and display the heights that men can reach at their best. This inspires hope in us. Both of these are of great value. So what does social realism offer? It may promise many things, but I believe it is a deception. Here is where I bring up what I coin global realism. Now, I call it global realism as it is what can theoretically be real under globalism. Now, there is a near infinite amount of content discussing how SJWs have ruined art and repeating the mantra of "go woke, go broke." But this is just scratching the surface. Calling it wokeness is quite reductive, and while it does get the job done for making fun of stuff like this, it does undermine the seriousness of it. So what is insidious about global realism? Well, think about it. If you are subjected to global realist artwork, day in and day out, in everything you see, from advertisements on buses to your favorite Netflix show, you no longer see it as global realism, you just see it as reality. This gives people a skewed perspective. When this perspective is shown to be unequivocally false, they may double down on their perspective and try to force it to be reality. This is why global realism gets more and more bizarre over time. There is a sort of Overton window for global realism. You can think of it as a slippery slope, or a death by 1,000 cuts, but essentially, we have gotten to the point where a black Anne Boleyn is actually supposed to be taken seriously. It may be fun to laugh at this stuff, but there's something unsettling about the psychological implications of all this. Boys and girls grow up to be men and women with, quite frankly, silly expectations of the opposite sex. Race becomes an interchangeable template which is completely divorced from any cultural context, and ultimately, any form of identity is stripped from its original and proper meaning and usually given its opposite meaning. Now, when someone tries to cast spells or fight dragons in real life, people are quick to point out how obviously fictitious this is. However, when someone points out the absurdity of this distorted global real worldview, they are met with accusations of bigotry. It gradually becomes more and more unacceptable to point out the obvious, like that women do not have 18-pack abs, and that medieval Europe was not 90% African. This may seem facetious to say, but people actually get angry at these facts, and that is the result of an all-consuming cultural conditioning. This is most evident regarding the upcoming Rings of Power, which will be the global realist version of The Lord of the Rings. The original Lord of the Rings, of course, is one of the most celebrated works of idealism in literature, and the Peter Jackson films are the best works of cinema of the 21st century. Art is important. This is not an empty platitude. It is everything. Stories have important messages. The best stories have messages that are so entwined with the tale itself that you do not feel as though you are being preached to. Sometimes the message will go over people's heads, but the essence of the message will remain. As Marshall McLuhan famously says, the medium is the message. Potentially, you can find many Lord of the Rings fans who vehemently disagree with the based and red-pilled messages of the series, yet they are still drawn to it. Why? Because its essence is larger than life. Many people are hypocrites. Their taste in stories says a lot more about them than whatever they state as their political and religious beliefs. In fact, politics and religion themselves stem from stories, whether from historical texts or biblical ones. So essentially, politics and religion are just fandoms. Really toxic fandoms. I guarantee that fans excited for Rings of Power will inevitably be disappointed and go back to the Tolkien and Jackson versions. Why? Because the message of Rings of Power is right in the open. It is not subtle, it lacks depth, and has no essence that distinguishes it from any other show. Sometimes you can judge a book by its cover. In short, global realism is boring and gay. Goodbye.